right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer.
Hello, listeners. Hundreds of organizations are pledged to march on the Democratic National Convention, August 18th to the 22nd, 2024, next weekend, Chicago. The coalition march on the DNC will be a march for Palestine. According to that coalition, the main demand will be stand with Palestine and U.S. aid to Israel. Other demands of the people's movements will be brought to the door of the Democratic Party there in Chicago at that convention. The demands include money for jobs of the coalition, include money for jobs, school, healthcare, housing, and environment, not for war, immigrant rights and legalization for all undocumented workers, defend LGBTQIA plus reproductive rights, defend the right to unionize and strike, stop police crimes, community control of the police now, justice, peace, and equality. A variety of information, including logistics and coalition endorsers and sponsors from across North America and the world, can be found at marchondnc2024.org. That's marchondnc2024.org. Those interested in participating can fill out various forms at the site for transportation and more, or just show up and join the marches. Two major actions of the coalition to march on the DNC include a 12 noon Monday, August 19th march, and that's going to start at Union Park in Chicago, 1501 West Randolph Street, and at 5 p.m. on Thursday, August 22nd, same location, Union Park, 1501 West Randolph Street. Numerous diverse delegations will be joining the protest, including the Labor for Palestine, National Networks, We Charge Genocide contingent. And as listeners might recall, or new listeners, that we start off the show or we talk about Palestine a lot. We do interviews. So laborforpalestine.net has been a great resource for finding statements. Labor for Palestine was established in April of 2004, and they do a variety of work in solidarity with Palestine and the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions. And more information is available at laborforpalestine.net. We are honored here today to speak to one of the organizers who is from Baltimore, Andrew from the People's Power Assembly, to talk to us tonight about why their organization is sponsoring and going to Chicago for the DNC and some of the work they're doing in Baltimore. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So what is your organization, Andrew, your People's Power Assembly, and what do you do there in Baltimore?
Yeah, so locally, we are the People's Power Assembly, but I'm also nationally part of Struggle La Lucha for Socialism. The People's Power Assembly is a somewhat broader, general working class partisan organization. It was established in 2014 around the murder of Trayvon Martin, and then it has primarily been the vehicle for the Black Lives Matter movement in Baltimore City. But of course, we're a comprehensive organization, so we tackle the issues of imperialism, defense of nations standing up against imperialism. But it really runs the gamut of issues that we take up, as long as there's a working class orientation, generally an anti-capitalist orientation. And so, for example, our main work since October of last year has been Palestine solidarity.
And Andrew, why are you all, Rick's going to be chiming in here with some other questions as well. Why do you feel it's important? Here on the show, we talk about workers' organizations such as unions supporting Palestine, the Palestinian trade unions, and everyone we've interviewed has a little different angle on this, but specifically, why does the PPA support the work in Palestine, in your view of why workers in the United States in particular should be supporting this work?
So we, in addition to being working class partisans, fighters for the working class here in the U.S., we have an internationalist perspective as well. We are very clear that Israel is but an outpost of U.S. imperialism, that frankly is a threat to workers everywhere, but especially the people of Palestine. Um, you know, I think a lot of organizations, since October have, you know, uh, straddled the line between support for Palestine and being unwilling to criticize Israel. Um, but we never faltered. We made it very clear in all our demonstrations, all of our political education. This is not the place to criticize the Palestinian resistance. This is not the place to clutch pearls. This is our you know our overall orientation is that the Palestinian resistance should be victorious. And so, it's and the connection to the working class here is maybe sometimes hard to see for people who are new to the issue. Um, but I mean, as soon as you frame it in the terms of all this money is going to fund this military operation, which is Israel, a Zionist occupation, and people here are starving. People here are struggling to win a union at work. People here are struggling to make ends meet with 2 or 3 different jobs, and it does not have to be this way because that money could be spent elsewhere.
And Andrew, of course, what's really being talked about a lot right now is the elections, and just wondering what your take on the elections is at the moment. What your take on Kamala Harris is. Actually, two-part question. So that's my first part, what your take on the elections is. And the second part is you mentioned socialism already. So what's that? What's your vision of socialism and how does that play into these elections?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this election period has actually been more of a roller coaster than I was expecting. Um, I think ever since Biden stepped down and Kamala stepped up, um, it's caused a lot of confusion amongst maybe not the mass movement, definitely not in the fighting mass movement. I mean, I think a lot of people are very square on the idea that nothing has really changed between Biden and Kamala. I mean, there's of course the unions are going to go to bat for whatever Democrat is in there, and and not even necessarily, but it just tends to be that way. I think because Kamala is a Black and Asian woman, and this this emphasis on representational politics, especially ever since the Black Lives Matter movement, is caused confusion in a lot of people. And there's a lot of issues that mass issues, for example, like there's sometimes where you're willing to take an entry level view in order to win people to a more radical view. So, for example, when the Russia and Ukraine issue came up, people didn't want to say, there should be no U.S. intervention. There should be no support for the fascist Ukrainian state, and that the Russian military operation is justified as a defensive measure. A lot of organizations sort of soft pedaled a position, and I understand the utility of that a lot of the time. But this is one of the times, we needed to tell the truth to the mass movement. You know, don't fall for this trick. Um, and that's how we view this now. We can't let people just fall for it. I don't know why people are falling for it. I mean, it's never been so clear that no matter who's in charge, the genocide is going to continue. The genocide profiteers are still going to be in charge. I mean, maybe Kamala has spoken out of both sides of her mouth at some point, but she's sworn allegiance to Israel. And there's another $20 billion weapons package that just got approved. I mean, I don't know what to tell people anymore.
You know,
But
I am
yeah.
in a similar boat. I don't know what to tell people anymore. You know, I just had a lively dialectical exchange with a good friend of mine last week where he couldn't believe that I wasn't voting for Kamala Harris. And, you know, I tried to explain myself, you know, especially coming to this labor show and doing this labor show. I explained, hey, listen, you know, in the last 2 years, we've seen more labor activity than we have seen in 40 years. Like, why are you seeing that and knowing that now, and you still want me to turn around and vote for the lesser of two fascists? No, 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 no. You know, the hope is in this. So, yeah, so thank you for sharing. And could you speak a little bit about your orientation and socialism and just real basically what that is actually? Because we actually don't talk about that much on this show.
What is socialism? Um, at a very fundamental level, socialism is a different system from capitalism, wherein people's basic needs are met without needing to pay through the nose for things that most people believe that everybody should have, and that's jobs, education, healthcare, housing, food. These are all essential human rights for people to live. And there's a lot of things that stand in the way of people understanding that this is possible. And it's a result of decades and decades, maybe even centuries of capitalist ideas being the prevailing ideas of the time. It's important to know that socialism has to be fought for and won. It's not going to come about on its own. And lots of different countries have taken different approaches to what that fight is, and how a revolution it must be conducted in order to win socialism. But at its very essence, we live under a class dictatorship. I think people shy away from talking about dictatorships unless there's, I don't know, one evil guy in charge. But we live under the dictatorship of the capitalist class. And I say this to say that under socialism, there's going to be a different class dictatorship, and that is the class dictatorship of the working class, wherein working class interests such as everybody having housing, everybody having healthcare, everybody being able to eat, that is represented and implemented through a new system that puts people over profits.
So this is a phrase, sometimes being determines consciousness. So Andrew, tell us something about yourself. How did you become an activist with the People's Power Assembly, and then beyond that, a socialist? What informed your personal experiences to get to that point in your life and where you're at now?
Sure. So my mother is from the Philippines. So I grew up, a mixed brown kid in a predominantly white area, and never really having the language to understand the kind of, I guess, alienation that I felt from not just peers, but teachers. And, I think I was 15 or 16 that I started funnily enough, listening to like anarchist punk rock, stuff like that. And when you're in those circles, all the punks make patches. They screen print their own patches. And it's funny, I started to pick up some of the language and the slogans about class war and capitalism, and anti-racism and things like that. So that's actually where I started to pick up some of the language from, and starting to wrap my head around, being able to explain my experiences growing up. And for a while, I was reading both anarchist and communist writing on the internet. But I don't think I was really driven to action until the murder of Mike Brown, who's actually the 10th anniversary of his death just passed the other week. And I was reflecting on it. And it's really true. Mike Brown made me a revolutionary. It was around then that, the contrast between the anarchist writings and the communist writings and analysis of the situation, analysis of racist police, analysis of the state. It seemed to me that the Marxist writers and the communist writers, their analysis held the most water to me, made the most sense to me. And that was when I said, well, I should really read more into Marxism then. And this is actually during my college years, and it was then that I decided I can't continue on the same path that I'm on. I was an English major. I thought that I was just going to continue on into grad school and, I don't know, teach one day maybe. But I talked to a lot of people that were into activism and organizing, and they said, well, maybe look into the labor movement, because at least until Friedrich was the boogeyman at the time, there's, you can at least pay your bills working in the labor movement and figure everything else out later. So I said, okay. I was lucky enough to meet people through the college organizing sphere that actually recommended me to look into working for AFSCME, which was my first job out of college. Learned a lot about organizing there. But I didn't jump into sort of the socialist sphere yet. It wasn't until Trump was up for election that I knew that I needed to get involved on a deeper level. And that's how I found my folks here at the People's Power Assembly. And it's been nothing but organizing and learning more and more and trying to make real contributions to a fighting mass movement ever since.
So it's what's going on in Baltimore now? What's some of the work y'all are doing?
Yeah, I mentioned before that a lot of our work since October of last year has been around Palestine solidarity, and it is still a big chunk of our work. But for example, almost weekly, pretty big marches through the streets of Baltimore. We've disrupted Baltimore City Council twice, shut down their meeting, demanding that they pass a ceasefire resolution, and they still haven't. So that's still something to knock off. Part of our demands were also to completely divest the Baltimore City Police Department from all Zionist institutions. We know for a fact that they are deep collaborators with the Israeli Defense Forces, as they call it. They do police trainings between the two bodies. Many people in Baltimore may know the blue light cameras throughout the city, and generally in blacker parts of the city. Those are Israeli made. They're purely for surveillance. And that's been part of the struggle. We're also taking on a new campaign in light of the Palestinian youth movement's larger campaign called Mask Off Maersk, which is their campaign against one of the biggest shipping companies. It's the second biggest logistical chain for the Israeli occupation. We are sort of particularizing that campaign, and we're targeting Amazon in Baltimore City. People might know, but Amazon has made a big splash in Baltimore City in hiring, filling a void that Bethlehem Steel used to occupy. Whereas for much of and because of the militant labor struggle in Baltimore City, you used to be able to raise a family off of one good blue collar job, but then outsourcing happens, Reagan happens, just one among many things. Bethlehem Steel shut down and outsourced all its labor overseas, which has left a pretty big gaping hole in the ability of Baltimore's working class to survive, more or less. Amazon wants to take its place, but not offer nearly any of the benefits. You can actually look up on Google. There's a couple of different accounts of workers that used to work for Bethlehem Steel and now work for Amazon, and can't really make ends meet. And at the same time, Amazon has a very lucrative contract with the Israeli government. It is a cloud service. It's called Project Nimbus. The IDF uses it. A lot of different departments in the Israeli state use it. It really does enable the IDF to coordinate strikes, to conduct surveillance, and to repress elements of the Palestinian resistance that they deem a threat, which is, of course, all of it. So rather than taking on any sort of boycott campaign, but although I do think Amazon is listed as one of the companies to boycott by the BDS campaign, our angle on it is to agitate among the workers and the community that Amazon 100% is going to affect, and to say, invest in your workers, not in genocide. So that's coming up. Another thing, got a couple of things that we're working on as well. We're linking up with some of the teachers in the Baltimore City public school system to run a school supply drive. Sometimes these supply drives, food drives, they can kind of be removed from any political messaging. It's just a matter of charity, like these kids need school supplies, and they do. But we're making sure to make our political message very clear. The investment should be in the schools and not in genocide. There's a couple other local issues that are coming up. I don't know if people are familiar with Sinclair Broadcasting. It's a hardcore right-wing sort of media company. It has bought out the Sun, I believe. check me on that later, but they're rising to prominence again in Baltimore City media. They are 100%. They already own Fox 45, which wrote a hit piece on one of our pro-Palestine actions last November. So you sort of see where they're lined up. They are actually trying to take they're taking up a legal initiative or legislative initiative to cut property taxes, which, sounds like it would be a good thing, but it's really an attempt to bankrupt the city, who, are relying on those taxes. And they're also trying to shrink the size of the city council, which, it's no secret that is usually a way to disenfranchise people from, city politics.
Okay, Andrew, there's been stuff happening on the streets, certainly in the last few years, and certainly with Palestine. And as I mentioned before, and, before we started recording, in the labor movement, things are happening. Like, people are taking to the streets and striking, or taking to the streets in protest of what's happening in Palestine and in solidarity with what's happening in Palestine. All that to ask, what inspires you right now? Where do you see some hope? Like, what can you point us towards? What can you point some of our listeners towards?
Sure. I mean, it's probably not a surprise to hear me say, but seeing the labor movement going in the direction of supporting Palestine really does give me hope. I actually, until October of last year, I was still working as a union organizer in the public sector. And, ever since then, I've not been able to see the actual developments within the Maryland sort of public sector labor scene, but I've been able to go out a couple of times. For example, there's a DC labor for ceasefire coalition between a number of organizations, and they are still, in the midst of a major struggle to get the DC City Council to pass a ceasefire resolution. And actually got to hear some of these labor figures who, some are retired and they don't have to really watch what they say so much anymore, but speaking openly against capitalism, and speaking openly in support of the Palestinian resistance. I mean, these are all things that really do represent, a qualitative shift towards the right direction. I really do believe that it's going to take the working class and organized labor to really put an end to imperialism in general, but also, speaking strictly on the Palestine issue, they're the ones that can stop the shipments of arms. They're the ones that can, even if they're not in the supply chain necessarily, there's ways to affect, Israel's ability to receive its weapons from the United States, and could really be the decisive force. And seeing more and more people taking up that cause and merging the working class movement with the anti-imperialist movement, that's what gets me excited. And the closer we get, the more excited I get.
All right, so we'll close up with asking you, y'all are going to Chicago soon. The Baltimore delegation to Chicago, why are you all participating in the Coalition of March on the Arts DNC and going to Chicago next week?
Yeah, the reason we're mobilizing to march on the DNC is because we're very clear that neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have any answers for people's burning issues. things I mentioned before, the genocide of Palestine, rising cost of living, rising inflation, needing 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. The Democrats don't have answers for this. And it's really going to take the fighting mass movement to make that clear to them, and to make it clear to the masses of this country that we need a new system. It's not going to be whoever we put in charge of the war machine that's going to be decisive in actually alleviating people's problems. It's going to be a fight for a new system. Like I was saying before, nothing about the situation has really changed. I mean, Biden stepping down, Kamala stepping up. There are changes in the equation for sure, and it's really just been, a matter of creating mass confusion. But nothing has changed. We want to be there to say that both of these parties are supporting the genocide, and they need to be exposed as such. And whatever contribution we make as a delegation in Chicago, we're just hoping to keep people safe, and but still, deliver a militant message to the Democrats, to the ruling class at large.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. I really enjoyed the interview, and thank you in particular for speaking about socialism and what that would look like and what that is. And listeners, I hope y'all can also appreciate that sort of thing. It's not too many spaces these days where you can just have a conversation, just a dialectical exchange as to what those kinds of systems are and what they would look like, and how they can come about. These days it's just very reactionary uses of the words, calling Kamala Harris a socialist and stuff like that, which really doesn't make any sense. So thank you for bringing that, Andrew. That I definitely benefited me, and I hope it benefited some of our listeners. And listeners, thank you always for listening. Just another reminder to please subscribe, please share, please talk about. If there's something in here that you like, go ahead and post about it and let people know. We only rely on word of mouth. We don't do commercials or anything like that. So if you want to see this grow a little bit, just please help us out. We love doing interviews like this and bringing you news from Palestine and news on strikes every week. So thank you again. Be sure to tune in next week. Love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.